week's episode, Why I'll Never Take a Shower Again by Girl from the Crypt.
I haven't showered in 3 months. I tried to hide it, but it's only a matter of time until the dry shampoo and deodorant will lose the battle against the stench I'm emitting. I know we all have basic sanitary obligations to fulfill as a member of society, but I just can't bring myself to do it anymore. This isn't a laughing matter, and I myself am quite unhappy with the situation. I can smell myself too, you know. It's not like I stopped showering out of my own free will. I stopped showering because I'm scared. I heard my parents talk about having me admitted to a mental hospital soon. I dread the day that it happens, but to be honest, I understand where they're coming from. I used to be really strict with myself when it came to my hygiene standards. A lot of things have changed about me. For example, I used to be an avid swimmer too. It all started someday during the summer holidays. I had just gotten my driver's license and drove out to the beach every day. I had discovered a really small section of the beach that was separated from the large one. It laid in between two lower ends of the cliff, and therefore took some climbing to get to. But once I was there, it was all mine. There would never be anyone else, just me, the beach, the rocks, and the ocean. All the other visitors would stay on the large beach, which would make me even happier to have found my own little place. I could relax and swim without having to worry about my stuff being stolen, bumping into people or kids building sandcastles on me while I was sleeping. That fateful day, I was all alone again, but there weren't a lot of visitors on the large portion of the beach either. Maybe just 2 or 3 people. That meant it was even quieter on my own private spot. I laid down on my stomach to sunbathe. I enjoyed the warmth on my back and the gentle sound of waves rolling against the shore. From time to time, I could hear the familiar cries of seagulls circling above the water. It was so wonderful, so pleasant, so relaxing. I felt myself slowly drifting off to sleep. I was awoken by the sound of crying. My eyes fluttered open to see a little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, standing right above me. I was a bit puzzled. Where did she come from all of a sudden? How long had I been out? She was wearing a cute blue swimsuit with a cartoonish seahorse on it. Her face was all red and swollen with tears, and her tiny frame was shaken by heavy sobs. I scrambled to my feet and put a hand on her small, skinny shoulder. Hey, are you okay? What's the matter? I stammered.
You're finally awake,
she sniffed in between sobs.
Please, you have to help my daddy.
Okay, shh, calm down. Everything's gonna be fine, I comforted her.
Will you help daddy?
Of course I will, sweetie. What happened? Where is he? I asked. The little girl wiped off the snot running out of her nose.
He's in the water, but he won't come up, she whimpered.
I couldn't help but immediately assume the worst. Where?
I'll show you. Please help him.
With an endearingly pleading look, the child grabbed me by the hand and began leading me into the water. We passed the shallow end and waded to where it got a bit deeper. The kid still had her head above the water, and I was above water level from my belly button up as well. But it was already deep enough that I was unable to look all the way down to my feet anymore. I figured that as long as I could still comfortably stand on the ground, I'd be fine. I would even be able to carry the little girl if I had to. Still, the fact that I couldn't see the ground I was standing on was still sort of unnerving to me. Watch out for pointy stones, I told the kid. We don't want you hurting your feet, do we? She led me a bit further into the sea, until only the upper half of her face was still poking out from the water. Her shiny blonde hair was floating around her head.
This is where I last saw him,
she gurgled, her mouth halfway underwater. I looked around. There was no one to be seen. I was beginning to get a little frightened. What would I tell the girl if I couldn't find her father? I leaned down into the water and splashed around a bit, just to check if there was something floating around out of sight. Nothing. I thought for a while. The current was not very strong around these parts. Assuming the guy had maybe lost consciousness, he couldn't have drifted too far away. I was just about to ask how long it had been since she had last seen him when suddenly I felt something wrap itself tightly around my ankle. I spun around to look into the now smiling face of the little girl.
Daddy's hungry, you know.
I shrieked as whatever had grabbed me pulled me off my feet. The last thing I heard before I was dragged underwater was the shrill giggling of the small child. I struggled, trying to swim and get back up, but the tentacle just strengthened its grip on my foot. I felt that it was pulling me further and further away from the shore. I kicked and screamed, which only resulted in me swallowing more of the salty water. I was panicking. I thought I was going to drown. I was running out of air. I could feel the thing slithering up my lower leg. In one last, desperate attempt to free myself, I jerked forward, grabbed onto the tentacle with both my hands, opened my mouth, and bit down on it as hard as I could. It loosened its grip. I could feel it. I dug my teeth into it again, much deeper this time. I could taste blood in my mouth. Finally, it let go. Before it could reach out for me again, I pushed myself up from underwater and gasped for air. To my surprise, I wasn't as far from the shore as I had thought. The little girl was still standing where I had last seen her, hatefully scowling at me. She was hissing and screaming with rage. I wasted no time. I swam as fast as I could. As the child's tiny, angry hands tried to grab me, I batted them away. To this day, I can only explain this sudden burst of energy with the effects of adrenaline on the human body. But before I knew it, I had passed the child and was steadily approaching the safety of the shore. As soon as I dragged myself back onto the welcoming dry ground, I got up, grabbed my car keys, and sprinted towards the cliffs. I hastily climbed up the boulders, ran over to where I had parked my car, and got inside. I didn't care about my other belongings I had abandoned at the beach. I didn't care I was all wet and sitting there in just my bikini. I simply started up my car and drove home. I never told anyone about it. Until now, of course. I guess I was scared. No one would believe me. I couldn't quite believe it myself. Needless to say, I never returned to that beach. But that didn't stop them. It was around 2 months later. I had planned a weekend trip to a lake close to my home with a few friends of mine. We would stay the night in a cabin right next to the lake. It belonged to the parents of one of my friends. I couldn't sleep too well that night, so went out to take a dip. I got into my swimsuit, grabbed a flashlight, and went outside. I shone the flashlight around to look for a good spot to enter the water when its beam suddenly fell onto something floating in the middle of the lake. I walked a little closer to the water and squinted my eyes. I nearly dropped my flashlight when I recognized her. Her head was poking out from under the water, just enough for me to see the wide grin on her face. I could feel my heart skip a beat when her high-pitched voice reached my ears.
Come on in,
she said in a low, strangely calm tone.
I need you to help my daddy.
I didn't tell anyone about that either. I just packed up and left that same night, to the great confusion of my friends. They kept asking me what was wrong. I simply replied I had changed my mind about staying the night at the cabin and that I was going back home. In hindsight, I maybe should have warned them. That thought came to me a little later that night. I called them the following morning to ask if they were all right, just for them to grow even more confused, telling me that nothing had happened. Apparently, no one else had seen anything strange in or around the lake that night. I was glad that they were safe, but I knew what that meant. They were coming for me, and only me. Ever since that day, it has started spreading. I began to see the little girl in every body of water. Whenever I would go to the public pool, I could always spot her standing somewhere in the crowd. I even caught her reflection in puddles on the street a few times. Then, 3 months ago, I was taking a shower when I heard a scratching sound coming from somewhere below me. I turned off the water to try and make out where it was coming from. The drain. I got on all fours and pressed my ear against the metal of the shower drain. What I heard made my blood run cold.
Daddy's hungry. You'll help him, won't you?
It was her voice. There was no doubt. I immediately got out of the shower and, well, I hadn't gotten back in ever since. I know she didn't do it for the fun of it. Her aim isn't to scare me, because if it was, she would have stopped a long time ago. Because, quite frankly, I haven't slept peacefully ever since. But I'm not going to die. I'm not going to let them take me. And I'm not taking any risk. I'm not showering ever again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Spooky Halls. If you've enjoyed the video, please make sure to check out our other videos and to subscribe. Good night, and thank you.